Ladies and gentlemen, if you would, find a seat. I'd love to get started here and get everybody on the road. Chairman Nix, would you mind opening us in a word of prayer, please, sir?
I'd be happy to. Thank you. Let's pray. Father in heaven, we thank you for so many blessings you give to us. And Lord, while we're here healthy and safe, we know there are people around the world who are struggling today, who are at war. Lord, our heart goes out to them, and we just pray, Father, that in your will and in your vision, that you would protect them, that you would bring that war to an end and restore peace in their lives. Lord, as we come here today to talk about education and the children in our state, we pray that you would bless us with wisdom and knowledge that can only come from you, that we would make good decisions, that would support our children, and Lord, that everything we do would be pleasing to you. In Christ's name, amen.
Amen. Thank you, Chairman Nix. I'll call this meeting of the House Education Committee to order. I'm going to present this first bill, so I'll turn the chair over to Vice Chairman Irwin.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I always enjoy it when a yellow jacket concedes to a bulldog. That's a good beginning here on this bill. And let's see, Senate Bill 575. Would you read the numbers on it for us, please?
588.
Oh, excuse me. You're right. That's the first one on the agenda. It is 588. Yes, sir.
Well, I didn't expect that I would have to come up here and just be thrown under the bus once again from my alma mater, but alas, here we are. Members of the committee, I bring before you Senate Bill 588. Today we're working on LC 490973 by substitute. Senator Miller couldn't be here with us today, so I'm going to do my best used car salesman impersonation and try to walk you through this bill. So if you will remember, we heard this bill on Monday. I submit to you today that this is quite a different bill, and the infinite wisdom and guidance of this committee has led us to a much improved Senate bill, and I'm sure all my House members can appreciate that. If you'll go with me, amen. If you'll start with me on lines 20 through 21, and I'll walk you through what the bill does. This bill here on these lines requires that local boards of education have a public comment period during regular monthly meetings. I think you will find that all of the points today that I'm making allow for transparency, access, and voice. On line 24, the bill requires that a local board of education cannot require parents to provide notice more than 24 hours in advance of a meeting of their intent to provide public comment before the board, and this keeps with open meetings standards. Line 28, the bill pertains to public meetings that are regularly scheduled and not meetings such as executive sessions that the board may have to undertake from time to time. So again, just those regular meetings there, as it says, regular monthly meetings on line 28. Line 37 requires that local boards of education will now have to publish notice of their regular monthly meetings on the respective principal public website. This is new. And post this notice in a prominent place. Right now, we feel like some notices could get buried, so we want it to be prominent. We want it to be there. Line 44. This version of the bill still requires that audio and video recording be permitted at all public school board meetings. Line 45 says the bill requires that local boards of education adopt rules of conduct for their public meeting, and that these local boards must publish their rules in a prominent place, again, on their website. These rules must contemplate for the removal of individuals from local board meetings for actual disruptions. Line 48, citizens may be removed from meetings of local boards of education for actual disruption and not merely for viewpoint or beliefs expressed. And almost here at the end, line 50, this bill does not limit law enforcement's ability to enforce the law should someone act in a manner inconsistent with Georgia law. And finally, if you'll notice on line 54, paragraph 5, a provision of this bill was present in an earlier version that allowed for a person to bring grievances to state superior courts and seek injunctive or other equitable relief. But this provision has been removed from this language, but it's incorporated here by referencing the Open Meetings Act, which still gives people access should they feel their rights have been violated. So, Mr. Chairman, that's the summary of this bill that affords the parents and community members of this state more transparency at these board meetings, more access to share their voice, and I'd be happy to entertain a question.
Great, thank you, Chairman Dubnik, and good, concise description of what has been changed. And I've been a very big part of talking and communicating about this bill, so I'll go straight to questions then if we can. I see Representative Benton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I've got a couple of questions, if I could. On line 24, you said that local board of education shall not require notice by an individual more than 24 hours prior to the meeting. If you do away with that, then you'll never know how many people are probably going to try to show up to speak. Is that and you might have problems with your agenda. I don't know where you might not see something that's controversial and other people think it is and show up in mass, and I was concerned about that. And if it'd be all right if I just ask you all a question and you can answer them. On line 31, you talk about that the local board shall annually determine dates of its regular monthly meetings and shall publish such dates either in official. Is this a publish of one time a year that you publish your meeting dates? Because if you're going to have to publish them every that you're having a meeting at such and such a time, then that's going to be a pretty good significant chunk of change to the newspapers. And the last one is that you did not say anything about the county organ, but a lot of counties only have one newspaper to publish their stuff in. So all of those are, if you could help me out.
Yes, sir. Yes. So on the last one again, with the line 30, the local board. This is what's currently there. Local board shall annually determine. We're just changing from date to dates of its meetings, and still shall publish those. So this, Representative, I would submit that we've just simply made plural the date to dates. We've said regularly monthly meetings, which just to confirm that this is regular meetings. So I would submit that we're not really changing any requirement there for publication. If we can go back to line 24, where your question was about 24 hours, and Chairman Irwin, if you would allow Legislative Counsel to be recognized, I believe they can weigh in, Representative Benton, from a technical standpoint of how that needs to be or why that's there. And if that's okay with you, Mr. Chairman.
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Walker, do you mind answering that?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Wait a minute, let me get you. Oh, there we go.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the language that starts at line 24 and goes through line 28, even though it is there underscored, it actually is a repeat of existing language. If you look at lines starting at 56 through 63, that's essentially identical language, and that was done in order to reorganize the existing code section for conformity. So the provisions that are in line 56 through 63 are essentially the same as lines 24 through 28. So they appear to be new language, but they're not. They're just relocated old language.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Yes, I do see it. Is it Representative Evans?
Thank you so much. Yes, I apologize. I missed the very beginning of the meeting, so I just want to make sure I understand the changes in the bill. So I know you've been obviously working on this language, and I think we all received the email from Gail. Is that one of the people you were working with in making these changes, Mr. Costin?
Yes, and we have, and we've discussed that, and I certainly will not speak for him
Right.
or on behalf of their organization. just because I haven't asked him where they ultimately landed on that, but I would encourage you to talk to him after the fact and certainly offer any further input.
Okay, thank you. Well, I just needed a reminder of what happens now if we have a person who's disruptive at a school board meeting, and so who does, I'd just like to remind, is it up to the school board or is it state law that says who can remove someone from a meeting? Do you know that? I'm just saying current situation now without this law.
Well, I mean, I think from where we sit now and where we're trying to look is that we're stating here that we will adopt those rules of conduct that specify what can happen, and so those boards may already have that in place in certain locations, but it's my understanding from Senator Miller that that's not always there in certain situations, and so we're putting that here on line 45.
Yes, okay, so you're saying the school board makes it public policy about what their rules of conduct are, and
yes, ma'am. On lines 46, we said that they shall adopt rules of conduct for public meetings, et cetera, and then line 48, such rules shall include provisions for the removal of members of the public for actual disruption from their public meeting.
Okay, and ma'am, that's just, okay.
Sure.
So what will happen now in this situation that Chairman Miller, brought up for us, or Senator brought up for us, where there was someone, so is it up to the school board? The way we're saying in this language, the school board could have a policy of not allowing a disruptive person to come back, or would they have to be disruptive at every meeting in order not to be able to come back?
Well, I certainly hope that there would be words in those policies that directly address that. But I think on line 50, where we say a member of the public may be removed from a public meeting for actual disruption of the proceedings as determined by those rules. So I think that it would, in those policies that are adopted here that we're referring, that it would address that.
Right.
But I think that, as we say, and the note here that I have is that we always want to allow those who feel access to the meetings is being stopped, but there's also a point where we have to proceed with the business of, as we would say, the business of the House, the business of the committee. So,
right. So if there was someone that was making like terroristic threats on social media against school board members or something, if the school board policy had something in their policy stating that people who did that would be prohibited from attending a meeting, this law would allow that. Is that correct?
I would think so, and I absolutely would, and would again defer. I know we talked about this with legislative counsel, Representative Evans specifically, about how social media plays a role in there, and as it relates to the Open Meetings Act. So,
and Mr. Chairman, I think it is appropriate for legislative counsel to respond to that question from Representative Evans. So hold on, Mr. Walker, I think you're on there.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Chairman, Representative, yes, the bill would allow for as Chairman Dubnick indicated, the local boards would develop their own rules. And insofar as the local board would effectively be responsible for the implementation of those rules and also having to address any complaints or concerns about those rules, it would be appropriate for them to develop them. So if there was, in your example, a situation where there was an effort to bar someone from attending a subsequent meeting, that is something that could involve some legal disagreement between that individual and the local Board of Education. So it would be up to them to defend their rules, to explain their rules, and to involve the legal process as those parties see fit. They would have the flexibility to do that, but no specific mandate on how to do that.
Okay, thank you. Another question from Representative Howard.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is, and I apologize if I'm overlooking it in the bill here, but what is the definition of disruption? And will that same definition be held in the place of every county in the state?
Well, I would think,
Will each county come up with their definition of disruption?
it would be my understanding, Representative Howard, that phrase of disruption would already be established, and that these boards would be setting rules around defining removal due to a disruption, but it is not my understanding that they would directly be getting to necessarily just pick and choose at their will. I think there's a minimum standard that applies to disruption in these cases and is already present there. And
So there's no written language that we have in the bill?
I certainly don't mind admitting to you that I don't know that answer specifically.
Okay.
But
I just don't want to see us get into a situation with a system and a board, and someone cries out their Second Amendment, I think it's the Second Amendment, is being violated, the speech.
the First Amendment, yes, sir.
First Amendment to speech, yes.
And we do say in here that they do have to, at the chairman's discretion, that they do have to allow public comment. And I think to your point, that's certainly part of it. And I think this does give local boards the ability to determine, again, a certain amount of disruption. If we look at line 50 through 52, Representative Howard, for an actual disruption of the proceedings as determined according to the rules of conduct for meetings open to the public. So I do think that this gives them, kind of that minimum standard to play with and allows them to further determine those disruptions.
So the rules of conduct would have a definition, I would imagine, then.
Again,
Let me refer again, if I can, Representative Howard, to Legislative Counsel for that.
Thank you. It could include, the local rules could provide for a definition of actual disruption, or alternatively, they could provide for essentially an approach to how that would be handled. So in other words, local rules of conduct may provide for a graduated approach where if someone is engaging in something that's arguably disruptive, they could be admonished by the chair of the board to maintain some order. If they disregard that order, then it would escalate the situation, and if it escalated further, it could result in calling a vote of the majority of the school board to determine that that person has been disruptive. So there are a few different ways that it could be handled. Unfortunately, there are just certain concepts that are difficult to provide a definite definition of. This might be akin to disorderly conduct, where it's hard to provide a precise definition of disorderly conduct or disruptive conduct. So it's one of those where you know it when you see it, as long as the local rules provide some guidelines on how that's going to be assessed, then those would be the rules that are applied in case-by-case situations.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. We've got one last question here. Representative Maynor?
Yes, thank you, Chair. To just clarify for lines 22 and 27, starting on the end of 21, such public comment period shall be included on the agenda. And then 26, 27, chairperson will have the discretion to limit the length of time of the comments. So I just want to know, when it says on 21, 22, such comment period shall be included on the agenda, will it say at that time the comment period is a minimum of 1 minute, or?
So again, on line 26, the chairperson of the local board shall have discretion, so to limit that length of time. So if, again, at their discretion, they can, in my opinion, very similar to the way that, when we go to debate, the speaker will say there's been an hour allotted, 30 minutes for those to speak for, 30 minutes for those to speak against, and it's the small thing, if you ever notice, he says, and I'll let those people figure out how much time they're going to get amongst themselves. That's him allocating time as the chair, no different than this would call for the chair of that board to be able to allocate time, and that public comment the fact that there is public comment would be there on the agenda.
And just follow-up question?
Yes, ma'am.
So on 2122, when it's on the agenda, is it going to say, when it says it'll be on the agenda, is it going to just say where on the agenda, or is it going to say
I think
a
it's,
time on the agenda?
yes, ma'am, I think we're stating that such public comment period, so public comment
Okay.
period would be listed on the agenda, and however much time is allotted for that and how that's doled out would be at the discretion of the chairman. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
That's how I understand it, too. Now, we do have a question online. Representative Gwynn?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chairman, this substitute version seems to alleviate some of the concerns that were brought forth in the original iteration of the bill. I just had one question about whether or not the School Board Association has a position on it or brought up any concerns.
Representative Wynn, I cannot speak directly to that, but I can tell you that those who reached out and asked for conversation and an audience for input and changes, to my knowledge, per my email and text string, were all accommodated.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yes, ma'am, thank you.
We have one other online question. Pro Tem Jones?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Chairman Dubnik. I really just want to applaud the changes to Senator Miller's bill, and that very much honor his intent, which was to encourage greater parental involvement, transparency, and understanding sort of the rules of school board meetings so that they can participate. And it appears to me that for the first time, they shall have to include a public comment period. For the first time, the school board meeting dates will be listed on their website instead of just in the legal organ. And as we know, newspaper readership is considerably down. So it's not exactly an easy place once a year for a parent to know when the school board meetings are. Not all parents are engaged in that manner. They're busy working and raising their children. But also, for the first time, the rules of, say, this, what we've been discussing, like disruption, will be defined so that parents, will know in advance, and if they're reprimanded or if they're asked to leave, they'll have a better understanding of why. And I think anytime we can make things clearer and more understandable to parents, that's a good thing. And I really am appreciative of the work on this bill and Senator Miller for bringing it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Pro Tem. And last up here is Chairman Chokas.
Chairman Chokas. Thank you for bringing this legislation forward, and thank you for improving it. So at this time, I'd like to give LC 490973S substitute for Senate Bill 588 the do pass recommendation. I'll move.
Great. We have a motion. We have a second. Any further questions? Hearing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed, same sign. Okay, the bill carries. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Senator Tippins, if you want to come join us up at the podium, and I believe you have Senate Bill 575, if you will alert us to that LC number and then proceed forward.
Yes, sir. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. Senate Bill 575 LC 490906. This bill is a single subject bill. The current code provides that the school boards will meet monthly, and at those meetings they will have to have a financial, they will present, the administration will present a financial report. This provision was added after the original code section because of some discomfort that some legislatures may have had with the lack of financial astuteness or accountability of maybe some districts. To do this on a monthly basis is a huge burden to the majority of our school districts. Any school district or any school board member that wants a financial statement can request it at any time from their local administration, but having a code mandate that they have to present a financial report and this being a requirement of law. I changed that to that it would be presented quarterly, but from a long time serving on a school board, I learned that the revenues and expenses, more so the revenues than the expenses, are very sporadic, and when they come in, basically have 3 times in a year that you have the majority of your money come in. One is in the spring count, one's a fall count, and the other is when your local taxes come in. So because of that, in particular months, you may see an abnormal spike in revenue, or the months that you don't receive a great deal of revenue, it'll look like you're operating in a deficit, but that's just the nature of the beast. The expenses are much more predictable on a monthly basis than the revenue is, because typically speaking, 88 to 90% of expenses it constitutes human resource cost or related charges to human resource. So from that standpoint, I mean, personally, I always paid a lot more attention to the annual financial report and looking at it as a year as a whole. But as a compromise, I just said, okay, just do it quarterly, and that should be sufficient for those that want a quarterly statement, and those that want a monthly statement can certainly request that and get it locally. But I don't believe it should be a code mandate, and that's the sum and substance of the bill. It will save our financial departments in our local school districts a lot of time for having to prepare a report that in most cases is scanned but really not acted on. It's just received.
Thank you, Senator. Vice Chairman Irwin.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, good bill. Very, very pleased with this bill. I think it helps out some school systems, that gives them a little more local control over that matter. My question to you, is, in the way I read it, is that they can still report it monthly if they want to.
Absolutely.
But it's got to be a minimum up to every quarterly. So if they want to maintain what they've been doing, they can.
Absolutely. They're not prohibited from it. Any school board member can request any financial information they want at any particular time. I could say that as a school board member. Time or two I had to just say, now look, either you're going to give me what I need to see, or I'm going to file an open records request, and it's not going to be pretty. But a school board member has that opportunity to do that and is enabled to do that. So this does not withhold information from anyone, but it's my contention, and I believe that a monthly report is really not indicative of the financial strength or weaknesses of the district because of the sporadic nature of the revenue.
And one more, Mr. Chairman, at the appropriate time, I'd like to recommend due pass of this bill.
Now's the time. So we have a motion that this bill do pass. There is a second. So we have a motion and a second. Senate Bill 575, LC 490906, do pass. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed, no. Thank you, Senator. That motion carries. And why don't you remain with us, if you would, and present Senate Bill 498, and if you will confirm that LC number that we're working on, please, sir.
Yes, sir, I am. That is the correct bill, and the LC number is 490924S.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Please proceed.
This bill has a potential to refocus the intention of accreditation in the state of Georgia, which I think is drastically needed. This, in my opinion, The evaluation and assessment of a local school district should be of the core business of a district. And I believe the core business of any school district we have in the state of Georgia, the accreditation of any particular high school, should be an evaluation of the academic and educational outputs of that district. Bottom line, it's a question of how well are our students doing. This is not even a major component of our current accreditation system. I want to be real clear. This bill is not intended to put anyone out of business, but this bill refocuses what our expectations as a state are of the accreditation agencies that are conducting accreditation, particularly of our high schools. Some of you may or may not know, accreditation is not mandated currently in law, other than the fact that to receive the Hope Scholarship, you have to have graduated from a Georgia accredited high school. Now the reality of it is anybody going to college, colleges use that as a evaluation of a student. Basically, for the same reason that SACS was created in 1895 to guarantee the quality of education and the consistency of education in colleges and universities, for the same reason accreditation morphed down to high schools so that the quality of education in high schools would be evaluated on a regular basis. This bill puts the focus on the evaluation of academic performance of the district. 80% of that accreditation should be on the academic outputs of a high school and the district as a whole. There's a red herring that has been circulated and say, oh, this is going to be all it's going to center on is test scores. That's not true. The criteria by which the evaluation and accreditation will seek to determine will be determined by the State Department of Education. They will articulate the parameters by which the district will be accredited, but it will have to be focused on academic achievement and education outputs. 20% of it, 20% of the accreditation will be on the financial accountability and responsibility of the district. Basically, how well do they handle the money that the taxpayers of their state and county have invested in the local Board of Education? I'm not afraid of good evaluations. I think any of us can do better. I think all of us, when we have small children, we carry them to the pediatrician. We have them weighed. We measure their height to see how they're doing. This bill measures the weight and height and value of education our students are receiving. There is no requirement in the state whatsoever for elementary and middle schools to be accredited. I probably am inclined at this point to amend the bill and have accreditation agencies for elementary and middle school written into the code, because I realize there are some districts that want their elementary, middle, and elementary schools accredited. But that would be at the choice of the district. There is no state mandate for that, and I think that's probably one correction we need to make. The main points of the bill: number one, this does not put anyone out of business. This is not a retaliatory bill. All it does is change the focus in the direction of education evaluation. I thought it was more meaningful and probably made a lot more common sense for the Department of Education to determine the parameters of evaluation than the legislature. That'd probably be the scariest thing I could think about, would be a legislative body trying to figure out exactly how we're going to evaluate proficiencies and efficiencies in schools. The third party, or the accreditor, or accreditation agency, in my mind, needs to be a third party. And the reason for that, you need an objective look. You know, sometimes your family won't tell you things that you need to know, but your good friends will. And I think an accreditation agency needs to be a third party. But the problem that we face right now is we don't have any oversight of the overseers. They basically function by setting their own guidelines and parameters by which they'll evaluate schools and school districts. There's very little competition in that market. And we almost have a virtual monopoly in the state of Georgia today. It was not created, but it more or less evolved out of the original SACs. I have in the bill that the state DOE shall perform evaluations as requested of elementary and middle schools. The reason I put that in there because DOE currently gathers the data that should be strong indicators in terms of the academic strengths and weaknesses of a local district. It's also come to my attention that I knew we had 2 accrediting agencies in the state that would accredit public schools. It's my understanding at this point that some of the or one of the accreditors does a great deal of accreditation for elementary and middle schools. I want to provide in the definition that these people could continue. It would not be mandated that a district would utilize any accreditation services for elementary and middle, but we also need to have the code provide for these accreditation agencies being approved by the state. The bill also deals with some other issues. Number one, on other issues, any request or complaints leading to a special investigation shall be subject to open records request, excepting those that would qualify as a whistleblower complaint. So if an investigation or either findings of a typical 5-year accreditation inquiry, if you have any information that the accreditation agency is operating on as a complaint, they would be subject to open records. I know I've seen situations where school districts would present information to rebut a decision or a finding, and it was just basically ignored. So we need to have openness in this entire process. I know in this case of Cobb County, there were numerous requests for the documentation of the complaints that led to a special investigation. None of those were ever given because they were told that the accrediting agency was not mandated by law to comply with open records requests. No organization serving as an accreditation agency shall be permitted to perform or provide remediation for any deficiencies referenced in the accreditation evaluation. When you have a party that's judging the education performance, and if they point out deficiencies, on the other hand, they say, well, we have part of our organization is to help people meet the standards to improve your district. That looks to me like a conflict of interest, and I think the accreditor there needs to be an absolute firewall between the remediation services for a district and the accreditation agency. It goes so far to say that no related organization related or associated in any way with the accrediting agency or its employees shall be permitted to provide remediation. Our current system that we have today basically, when you get right down to it, is an evaluation of the behavior of the adults. It's a question of how well do the adults play in the sandbox on the playground. If you look at that, that's not the core business. Quite often you'll see school boards divided along political lines, and a lot of times their thoughts or they have differences of opinion. But if that is a measure, a valid measure of effectiveness of the district, then I think you could make the case that the Georgia legislature is deficient, because many of our decisions are divided along party lines. That doesn't mean that it's broken. That's the reason I think the focus of accreditation does not need to be on how the adults are behaving, how well they get along. It needs to be on the academic outputs of the district. You can have boards of education that don't agree on everything, and they may routinely disagree, but as long as the academic performance of the students in that district are where they should be, that's what the district's there for. I've been in business a long time. I've bought a lot of vehicles. I've bought a lot of equipment. I've seen a lot of people buy automobiles and trucks, and they'll tell you, man, it had great tires and it had great wheels on it, and look at this paint job on this thing. That's basically what we're looking at in our current accreditation process and evaluation. It's the external appearances of the district. I can tell you, somebody's bought a lot of equipment. I'm a lot more concerned about how well the engine and the transmission functions than I am what the paint job is. And that's what we need to be doing, is looking at the function of our school district. How well does it perform? Not does it get us where we want to go, but does it get our students where they want to go in life? I doubt there's any colleges or universities in the United States that when they're considering the admission of a student into their institution, ask them, well, now tell me this, how well did your school board get along? Because your admission's going to be based on how well your school board got along. You know, bottom line, they're looking for the academic preparation of a particular student. They don't really care about the district. They don't even care about the high school. They really don't care about how the senior class performed. They're interested in the performance of one individual. And I think we need an accreditation system that goes deep enough and wide enough that we look at the performance of individual students, and we can compile them as an evaluation of the whole. But colleges and universities don't care how the school boards operate. They look at ACT, they look at SAT, and they look at how many advanced placement tests a student took and how well they did on them. It's the academic performance that colleges and universities look at. And that's what we need to focus an evaluation of our efficiencies as districts. This pretty much sums up the bill. A lot of that's personal opinion, I'm sure, but I've been involved in education policy for over 25 years. I will say this, about 10 years ago I asked a question when the issue came up in DeKalb County, and they used the report at that time to take some action against the school board. And I can say this probably without fail, I think the behavior of the adults at that time adversely affected the academic outputs of the district. And that's a horse of a different color, because if that's the case, that needs to be brought up as discussion points. But when you think about it, the behavior of the adults, every one of those people were elected by the electorate. And unless they've committed a crime or a serious ethics violation, you cannot remove them from office, because they were put in place by the voters in their districts. And by and large, you cannot control the behavior of an elected official. If they want to behave poorly, most of the time they're going to do that. I think we've all seen people that do that. But 10 years ago, I think it was in 2013, 9 years ago, I asked a question. I looked through the SACS report, and I asked them, I said, where's the piece on academics performance of this school district? They said, oh, well, we don't do that. I said, well, why not? That's what we should be looking at. And they said, well, we don't do that. We can do it, but we're going to have to charge more for it. I said, and I told them something to the effect, I think you may have the cart before the horse. It's the academic performance that counts. That's what this bill is intended to do. This bill wants to set a new direction, not for the adults, but for the students. We owe it to our students. I do not believe the accreditation that we have right now gives us an honest evaluation. If we did, I know 4 or 5 years ago, I looked at the statistics of the number of students we have in the state of Georgia that get Hope Scholarship. At that time, 61% of the students that earned Hope Scholarship, 61% that earned it lost it within 2 semesters. And only 15% of that 61% ever regained it. So 46% of the students that received Hope Scholarship were not qualified. We're not prepared to perform on a college level. That's important. That's a huge amount of money. We need to look at those type indicators. Another thing, those of you that know me know that I constantly harp on elementary education. I believe the ability to read proficiently, not just at 3rd grade level, but at 1st grade level, in 2nd grade level, in 3rd and 4th and 5th, we need to look at those numbers and evaluate them, because the child that gets behind doesn't need to wait till the end of 3rd grade for somebody to say this child needs help. We need to look very strongly at academic performance, especially in reading, and secondly in mathematics skills, because the student that's well prepared is not going to be a problem in high school. You know, statistics will tell you that with about an 85% accuracy, you can predict those students that are going to drop out of school by the time they start 4th grade. Well, if that's the case, why isn't our focus on academic performance?
Very well said, Senator. I appreciate your continued comments and focus on the fact that academic achievement and academic performance should be the focus. And before I turn this over to the committee for a few questions, I'd just like to ask a few myself.
Yes, sir.
On line 109, you mentioned that...
What line?
Sorry, sir, 109. I just want to commend you for putting that in there, and I know you mentioned this, that if adverse accreditation is taken, that the accrediting agency, cannot require the use of other services to address those. As you mentioned, that would be a conflict of interest. But Senator, where would you place the authority to oversee and monitor those accrediting agencies? Would it lie with the Department of Education? Would it lie within this body?
Well, obviously, I believe that any finding of an accreditation should be appealable. I think you ought to be able to file a challenge to it, and I think that if it's acted on, or if it's not acted on, I think if a district still feels like they have been misabused, if you will, I think they ought to be able to appeal it to the state DOE and let the DOE make a determination. It was the accreditation process in keeping with the guidelines that DOE prescribed.
And my final question, you made reference early on to there's no oversight of the overseers. So two-part question here. How many agencies right now in the state of Georgia can accredit schools?
There are, I think, 7 agencies that can accredit private schools, and there are 2 that accredit public schools. That would be Cognia and Georgia Accreditation Commission.
Okay. Thank you very much. We will turn our questions to the audience participation portion here. Representative LaRicchia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Senator Tippins. I know how long you've worked and how passionate you are about public education and for our children. Like Chairman Dubnik, you addressed one of my main concerns there in 109 through 113, where those accreditation agencies would not be able to come back in and contract with or be paid to help with the remediation of those findings. So my question would be kind of two-part. This would not prohibit these schools from using GAC as an accreditation agency, or if it does, is there any cost, an additional cost involved when we start to limit what accreditation agencies these high schools can use? Is there going to be a cost increase to some of those schools if they change or have to do that?
I can't speak to that with firsthand knowledge, but it's my understanding that currently the districts are paying for these remedial services now, and it's a considerable book of business for the accreditation agency. I've got some statistics on that, but I don't have them with me.
All right, Representative Maynard.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Senator, for the bill. I personally have not received any calls saying that anyone was against the bill, and just being in healthcare, I'm used to being overly scrutinized, so I think that, I don't think that that's a problem, especially when we're talking about educating our kids, just making sure that all I's are dotted and T's are crossed. My question really is related to after lines 55. In my particular district, a lot of the schools are failing, and I often say it's not the teachers. And so my thought is, if the schools are accredited, then this can show that, what the other faults may be, because it is indeed not the teachers. And right now, the state of Georgia, we recently just passed this, or we're trying to get the lead study, House Bill 1355, passed over in the Senate, and that was about childhood lead toxicity. And so what I would really like to see, because some of our schools are outdated in infrastructure, I think that part of the accreditation process should also include testing for lead, because lead has shown to decrease child IQ. It's shown to the students may have behavioral problems. So if we're really trying to see how students are performing, and the state has some issues with lead, especially in my district, we were just placed on the EPA National Superfund priorities list. I think that, would you be interested in adding lead testing to the accreditation process?
I didn't understand adding. Would you clarify one more time on adding? What's the exact domain that you're talking about adding again?
Lead testing in the schools as part of the accreditation process.
Don't know, never really thought about that.
I was going to say, you bring up a very good point, and Senator, I think kind of going back, I agree with your statement that we are looking at the academic performance of those students and that, if you will, that body as a whole, and I'm less concerned with how board action directly impacts accreditation, but I think the lady makes a good point about infrastructure or performance over the course of time. So that may be something that you and I could look at. I haven't thought about that either, some of those external factors, but we'll certainly consider that. So, Representative Benton.
I will say this. I know that in the past there was a pretty extensive evaluation of facilities and materials that were furnished in the academic process. And that's why I say this is not all about just an evaluation of test scores. I think, clearly you need to look at gap closure, you need to look at student success rates academically, but you also need to look at the different domains of different demographics and closing the gaps on student achievement in those areas. And part of that is provision of capital resources. I do think that that's a peripheral issue. Obviously, you don't want a school that's the children are being poisoned with lead when they're in class. But I really, I mean, I'd be more than happy to look at it with the chairman and see if that can be brought in. But I think, to me, if you look at overall performance of schools, one of the things that's not evaluated is the differences in the populations of the students. I know I was visiting in an elementary school one time. I was chairman of the COB board, and I'd go around. I'd talk to the teachers more than I would the principals, because that's where you get the story on what's happening. And I asked a teacher one day, I said, I always ask them, what's the biggest challenge that you face? And she said, transiency. And I asked her, she asked me, she said, all right, I had 25 children that finished school at the end of last year. Would you like to guess how many of them started school in the previous fall? I said, probably, I don't know, you may have a high turnover. I'd say probably 11 to 15. She said, she said she had 2 students that were there in September that finished the year. Had 23 of those 25 students turned over, and she said some of those turned over more than once. Those type indicators can explain why you have challenges in delivery. Being a pipeline contractor, I can tell you there's a lot of difference if I go over in extreme West Carroll County to lay pipe where nothing's in the ground, nothing's in the way, and it's good digging. We can get 2,000 feet a day over there. But you let me go dig under one of these sidewalks down here in Atlanta, we may not get 30 feet a day. So it's not all about how many feet of pipe you lay every day. So much of it has to do with an evaluation of underlying conditions that affect productivity. That's the kind of analysis we need.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Tippins, I appreciate you bringing the bill. As somebody who endured a half a dozen of these during my career, and even had to serve as chairman of the welcoming committee the last year I taught. It is one of these things that has needed to be looked at for a long time. I always felt like that the schools were on trial, that the middle schools and elementary schools, we knew they didn't have to go through this, but we were made to go through it because it looked better for the whole system to do it. I think that you're on the right track, and I'd love to see this bill move forward this year. And while I've got the mic, if he doesn't turn me off, I just wanted to thank you for all of your work in education. It has been, from a former educator, it has been very much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Chairman.
We're going to go online for 2 questions. Representative Wade.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Senator. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
All right, just quickly, first a comment. I too wanted to thank you for your years of service to not just the constituents that you serve, but to educators and students across this state. I followed you as a young school board member when I was elected in 2006, and you're an inspiration and a reason that I'm willing to serve in my capacity in the State House. So I know you and I have not had many conversations, but you've made an impact, and I've been an observer for years. I like the concept of what you're looking at doing. I also want to let you know that I'd like to have a conversation about how we look at funding K through 5. I have been frustrated for years hearing that most 3rd and 4th grade teachers can tell you which children are at risk for not graduating, and yet we don't have a good system to encourage those students to be retained to address those shortcomings. And folks, we are going to see a lot of that issue in the next 2 to 3 years due to what's happened in our state due to COVID. And I'm very concerned about not just literacy rates, but the gaps and the gains that we've made prior to the pandemic. Many have been put on pause, and much has caused, unfortunately, a direction that has turned. I say all that to say, my question is do you think that having the governance structure of a school board looked at as a component of assessing schools by somebody is an important part of understanding one of the criteria and one of the determinants for success in a school system? Having been a member of the GSBA for many of my years in service, governance teams and making sure that we worked together was an important factor. I was frustrated that in some cases that one bad apple could cause a loss of accreditation, even if the people willing or able to unelect that person weren't willing to. But that's just, I want to understand, do you have an alternative recommendation? I know that teachers, for example, 99.78% of them are awesome, and occasionally a few have to be referred to the PSC. Do you think there is an appropriate role for dysfunctional school boards and governance teams to be addressed at the state level in some form or fashion?
I don't have a problem with the state having an avenue of intervention if the basis of the intervention is because of the academic failures of the district, and if the behavior of the school board negatively affects the academic outputs of the district. Certainly that would feed into it. My hesitancy on this is I really don't know how you can effectively change the behavior of adults unless you remove them from office. I mean, you can threaten to remove them from office, and that's been done before. But, you know, I think if you, there's more reasons for low performance in schools than a non-functioning school board. You could have school board members that get along real well, and you can have relatively low academic results. All you have to do is pretty much look at the transiency and the socioeconomics of the families that are coming in. It has to do with the preparation of the children that come to school. I think that's very important, and those are domains that need to be evaluated. And I've said all along, there's no reason that an accreditation agency could not have a list of notes, an appendix attached to their evaluation report, calling out the school board members if they see that their behavior is detrimental, even though it may not negatively affect student achievement in a provable manner. And the problem is how do you prove that it's the school board's behavior that causes a low-performing school? So I believe there's a role for an observation of the behaviors of school boards. I just don't think that's what the accreditation needs to be based on. That's not our core business.
I agree with that. Representative.
I do as well. Thank you. I agree.
Representative Wade.
Thank you.
Representative Evans and Representative Wynn, you have our last two questions, but I'm going to make a brief statement here. Representative Evans and Representative Wynn, if this were to change your line of questioning. Senator, I know they're waiting on you, as you told me in a Senate
They're not
meeting.
waiting on me, because they're going to have to get used to doing it without me anyway, so a few minutes is not going to make any difference.
But Senator, I'll make a couple quick comments. How the DOE is involved in this moving forward, the oversight of the overseers, having more options, accrediting K-5 and middle schools, I think are some of our core issues. And so here's the posture that I'm in, if you would agree with me, and members of the committee. I would like to ask Vice Chairman Irwin to work with you, Senator, on this bill, because I think there have been some good points brought up today and some things that we can can work on with your guidance and the input that has come today and all the notes that we've taken here. And so I'd love to have you back before this committee with maybe version 2, if you will, of this bill, if that'd be something you're agreeable to. So with that in mind, Representative Wynn and Evans, I want to give you both time to ask questions should they still apply. So Representative Wynn, you were next in line, so I'll recognize you given the posture we're in if you still have questions.
Thank you, Chairman. I did have a question and just something that I wanted to ensure that when we're looking at academic achievement, we know there's been a lot of discussion over time about the challenges with mandatory testing and how students just perform differently when it comes to testing. And the only thing I wanted to flag is just concerns around how that might be used punitively if children are just not testing well on the standardized testing.
Thank you, Representative. I've added that to my list of things to discuss with Senator Tippins and Vice Chairman Irwin, and I do think that necessitates a discussion. So thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yes, ma'am. Representative Evans.
Yes, thank you so much for bringing the bill, Senator Tippins. And I just wanted to build on these external factors. I mean, I'm in favor of this bill, but I wanted to just ask, as you're thinking about other things, I guess basically it would be GOE does have a big job ahead of them to figure out what this accreditation process would be. And so Representative Mainer's already talked about lead, but I was in a meeting yesterday talking about air quality, that has a huge impact. I mean, poor air quality, has an impact and on learning. And then you've already talked about transiency. So all these things would have to be factored in. But I think that might not be in the bill. It might be how the GOE does its accreditation. But anyway, I think it's going to be sobering. That's the only thing I'm a little worried about for us to see. I would hate for our low-performing schools to not be accredited. I mean, it's going to lead to some, but I mean, then again, maybe that's the direction we're going. But it's going to be a big task for our state.
Thank you very much. And Senator, I can't thank you for being here enough today. I think you've heard from a number of members of the committee that we are definitely headed in the right direction, and that this is a task worth undertaking, and we'll walk beside you and work together with you.
Thank you so much. If you'll let me know when y'all are available to meet, I'll change my schedule to accommodate it.
Yes, sir.
Thank y'all.
Thank you, Senator.
Appreciate it.
Representative, you've been very patiently waiting. Representative Jackson, if you'll join us at the podium. Members of the committee, we have House Resolution 881 up for consideration today. Representative, if you would confirm that number is accurate, and then give us the LC number, and then please proceed with your presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I bring to you House Resolution 881, LC 490909.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. This resolution, encourages each public school in the state of Georgia to study the civil rights era and related subjects. And if you look at line 5, and it says, whereas during the period in American history known as the civil rights era, reform-minded Americans organized to press for a rejection of the doctrine of separate but equal, and to repeal the Jim Crow era laws in parts of the United States that embodied such doctrine. Line 13, whereas there's no greater authority on the destructive nature of bigotry, nor is there a better cure than the work and philosophy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and his principles of nonviolent social justice toward productive goals. And if you'll look over at line 19, whereas a curriculum for the study of the civil rights era could serve to educate students about the natural law and natural rights principles that informed the leadership of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in the civil rights movement, and the tactics and strategies of nonviolent resistance that he championed in response to Jim Crow laws. Skip down to line 28. Now therefore be it resolved by the House of Representatives that each public school in this state is encouraged to study the civil rights era and related subject described herein, to affirm the commitment of the free people of this state to reject bigotry, to champion equal protection under the law as a foundational principle of our republic, and to add in opposition to injustice wherever it may occur. That's the gist of the resolution. I would say that it has bipartisan support. Chairman Belton, Chairman Irwin, Representative Williams, Representative Wade, and others worked on this bill.
Representative, thank you so much for bringing this to us. Chairman Belton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's just, Representative Jackson, isn't it true that we worked together very closely with you on make sure we get this bill to perfect the language of that, sir?
That's right. We worked very closely on this bill.
A follow-up question, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to address lines 26, where it talks about not just the civil rights movement in America, but all around the world. And isn't it true, Representative Jackson, that Dr. King got a lot of his ideas from Mahatma Gandhi, the Salt March in 1930, the British getting India to get independence from Britain, but also the Prague Spring in Czechoslovakia in 1968, the 1973 White Revolution in Afghanistan, the Coronation Revolution in Portugal in 1974, 1966, a peaceful movement in the Philippines, 1980, the Solidarity Movement in Poland, the Singing Revolution in Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia, the Fall of Berlin and Wall of 1989, the Velvet Revolution in Czechoslovakia, the Bloodless Revolution in Bulgaria, and most specifically, the 2004, the Orange Revolution in 2004 in Ukraine that gave those people sovereignty over the people. And all these different movements were peaceful movements. And it did not happen by accident. It happened by the transcendence of human dignity, responsibility, productive citizenship that Dr. King talked about. Isn't that true, sir?
The gentleman knows that which he speaks. He was instrumental in getting that history for us.
Representative Benton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Jackson, I appreciate the resolution. I do have a couple of questions about this. In this, and it seems to be the feeling that Jim Crow laws were only in the South, and we know that that was not true. We can read the biographies and autobiographies of sports, of baseball and football players that when they rode the trains up north, they had to ride in a different car, and when they got to the town that they were staying in, they had to stay in different hotels than the rest of their teammates stayed. We know this, and yet there still seems to be this pervasive idea that Jim Crow is all South. And so I was wondering if you would consider a couple of amendments to your resolution, just to indicate that Jim Crow was not just a Southern thing. And I will stop there, and whenever I have the opportunity, I'd like to suggest those amendments.
Thank you, sir. Representative Evans.
Thank you for bringing this bill. I wanted to just know, what is in Georgia standards for teaching about the civil rights era now? Do we know that?
Don't know that right now, but we can find out for you.
Okay, thank you.
Chairman Nix.
Thank you. You looked right at me when you called on Representative Evans, and so I jumped. I like this idea, and this is an encouraging resolution, and Representative Evans kind of pointed to this. Would this be used to replace something that we already have? I think this is a good idea, and the thought is good, but would it be used to replace something that's in place now?
No, we're not trying to replace anything. We're just encouraging the school systems to study the civil rights area.
Okay. Again, I would assume that there is some organized curriculum to study this now. So if this were being substituted and I'm asking, I guess I'm asking the Vice Chair here, would this have to substitute for something else to be able to be used in its entirety?
No, Mr. Chairman, I take this as an opportunity for systems to accentuate, which is already in the standard. We do teach civil rights, as you could imagine, in school and in history in what occurred, but this gives the system the opportunity, if they want to highlight that section. Is that kind of how you feel?
That's the way, exactly, Mr. Chairman, is the way that we feel about this.
We're not adding to the curriculum there or changing the standards that
Correct.
Georgia sets. I think what we're doing is we're highlighting that section.
Correct.
Thank you. Seeing no other questions at this time. Oh, Representative Howard. This would be the appropriate time to make that motion. We have a motion that this resolution do pass. We have a second. So just to confirm, there is a motion that House Resolution 881, LC 490909 do pass. At this time, we'll open it up for any discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I hope that, and knowing him, I know that he will look at this as being as friendly amendments, because I'm not trying to do anything to this bill. I'm trying to help the bill here. And so my first amendment, and I've got 3 places that I'm wanting to amend. And then if Legislative Council sees any other places where what I'm doing needs to be done somewhere else, we can do it there. But on line 7, where it says to repeal the Jim Crow era laws in parts of the United States, I would like to strike parts of, where it would read to repeal the Jim Crow era laws in the United States, to take out the word parts of.
And just say in the United States.
In the United States.
Representative, why don't you go ahead with those other 2,
okay,
so that we'll have them at least for consideration here and discussion. And
the other 2 have to do with just inserting a word at a couple of places. And the reason I'm looking at this and the reason I'm making these changes is that we know that when Dr. King went to Chicago, he found what he referred to as virulent a crowd as he'd ever seen anywhere in the South that were opposed to what he was wanting to do. And we know that segregation is also confining people into a certain area that we refer to as slums or ghettos. And so that was what he was trying to work on, was trying to alleviate that, and there were people in Chicago that didn't want that. And so on line 22 and on line 37, in front of the words Jim Crow, I would like to have the word national, or the same, if you can come up with another word besides national, to where it would read that he championed, this is on line 22, that he championed in response to national Jim Crow laws.
So, Mr. Walker, I believe what we have here that we will refer to as the Benton Amendment would be on line 7. Representative Jackson, I'm asking you as well.
Sure.
To strike the 2 words parts of, and then on line 22,
That would be good, or countrywide. I'm just looking to make sure that we're showing it's a national situation, not sectional.
and I'll recognize you. I think, Mr. Walker, you see that on line 22 and 37, in front of both references to Jim Crow, we are hearing with possibly the words national, pervasive, but I'll let you weigh in, please, sir.
For consideration, Mr. Chairman, since the initial reference to the Jim Crow era laws is on line 7, and as Part 1 of the Benton Amendment would strike out the language parts of by operation, then the Jim Crow era laws in the United States would be your operative term. You could use then on lines 22 and 37 in front of Jim Crow, you could just insert such as a way of referring back to the Jim Crow era laws in the United States.
So for the committee, the Benton Amendment would be to strike parts of from line 7 and to insert on lines 22 and 37 before the reference to Jim Crow, the word such. So we have a motion on the amendment. Is there a second? There is a second. Is there any discussion on the Benton Amendment? Hearing none. All those in favor of the Benton Amendment, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No. The amendment is adopted. Representative Wade, you are recognized for a brief comment.
I just wanted to thank Mike Jackson. Can y'all hear me? Making sure.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you for carrying this resolution. And I want to highlight the comments related to Georgia standards. In another bill, I presented a copy of Georgia standards as it relates to not only the civil rights movement, but also other extremely important parts of our history that led up to the civil rights movement. I think the reason for the bill and the reason I was a signer on it, number one, not just because of the gentleman that brought it, but because it is imperative that school systems prioritize this part of our history as a part of the educational outcomes of our students. And given that there are limits to how teachers, there's only so many hours in each day and there's a lot of standards to cover, the reason is we want to ensure that this is prioritized as a part of education across the state so that we can continue in that pursuit to build unity and to make sure that children know how much can be accomplished when you address issues the way that Martin Luther King taught. So I just wanted to put that on the record and again thank the representative and my friend that brought this resolution, and I appreciate the opportunity to clarify that. And I'm happy to make sure that the Georgia standards that relate to this are shared with all the committee members and anyone that ever asks. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of this resolution passing, please say aye.
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 Any opposed, no. Thank you. The motion carries. Representative, we appreciate you being here. Members of the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the committee.
Members of the committee, for your knowledge, we will not be meeting tomorrow or Friday. We will not be meeting tomorrow or Friday, but we do have some legislation we're working on further. So at this time, we will stand adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.